Merci beaucoup, John, d'être avec nous.
C'est mon plaisir.
On avait envie de te partager déjà que bon, on est fan du Dragon Dreaming, de cette culture, de cette philosophie, et qu'on a beaucoup de plaisir à accompagner les équipes sur la base des quatre étapes. Donc les quatre étapes, rêve, plan, action, célébration. Et puis, ces quatre étapes qui peuvent permettre de générer des projets, quoi, des équipes de projets ou de régénérer des équipes de projets. Et puis j'avais envie de te poser un peu la question, en quoi le rêve et la célébration dans ces quatre étapes, pourquoi c'est si important en fait?
And for the most part in project management, if you read project management literature, and there's a lot being written about project management, most project management literature is about planning and doing. The importance of the dreaming and the celebration is that dreaming and celebration tend to be much more right brain activity, the right hemisphere of the brain. The planning and the doing tend to be left brain activity. What we find is that when people talk about intelligence, they generally tend to focus on cognitive intelligence. All intelligence tests are tests of cognitive intelligence. But if you're looking at adaptive intelligence, we need to include creativity. We need to include the intelligence of implementation. We need to include wisdom. And these other forms of intelligence, creativity is very much a process of the dreaming stage. Cognitive intelligence is very much a process of the planning stage. Implementation intelligence is very much about doing. And wisdom is very much about celebration. It's about reflection. Mm-hmm. So that's why we need to have all four. Now, where do we start in a project? It depends on the project. If you come into a project when it's already engaged in planning, you can join in the project in the planning stage. If you come into a project that people have already started doing, you can come into the project in the doing stage. If you want to start a project for yourself, you have to bring together, you have to share your dream and build a team around your dream. And building that team around your dream will involve elements of celebration. Mm. The celebration is what produces discerning wisdom, and wisdom connects back to awareness, which is needed at the beginning of any project. Now, those four steps, the dreaming, planning, doing, and celebrating, are fractal, which means that you find that those four steps are found inside each quadrant. The dreaming stage of dreaming is the awareness stage. The planning stage of dreaming is building the motivation. You can have all the awareness in the world. If you don't have motivation, you won't get anywhere. The doing stage of the dreaming is to gather information. And then the celebration stage of dragon dreaming is as you gather information, that will feed back through a process of revision to change your awareness. So there's the four steps inside the dreaming stage. And you find the four steps are in the planning, you find the four steps are in the doing, and you find the four steps are in celebration too.
We use the four step in a lot of variety of time for the big picture of the project, and sometimes just for 1 hour. We have something to do. What is the dream for this hour, the plan for this hour, the action, and we celebrate the hour.
Exactly. It's very interesting. One of the things about dragon dreaming is that I come from the European Australian culture. Now, the European Australian culture is all about planning and doing. Aboriginal culture here in Australia is much more focused on dreaming and celebration. So we need to bring both sides together to walk on two legs.
I also have a questions about the celebration. I have read somewhere that the celebration could participate to heal the person or the team.
Very much so. The celebration stage is a wonderful quotation from the Sufi saint Rumi. Rumi said that beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. That's the nature of true celebration.
So we've got some more specific questions because we have speak about the dreaming and the dragon and the dreaming. What is the dragon? What is this? And how can we dance with the dragons?
Yes. When dragon dreaming started off, the first course of dragon dreaming that was taught at university, in a university in Western Australia, it was called Wargle dreaming. Now, what is the Wargle? The Wargle is the dreamtime rainbow serpent of the Noongar people in the southwest of Western Australia, the Aboriginal people in the southwest of Western Australia. And they talk about the songlines, the journey that the Wargle made. Now, when we started dragon dreaming, we called it Wargle dreaming. But there were so many people who said, Wargle, huh? So we looked for an archetype that would have the same kind of psychic energy for you Europeans that the Wargle has for Aboriginal people. Now, the interesting thing about the Wargle is that it was believed to be a legendary animal. But in the last 30 years, they've discovered that when the Aboriginal people arrived in Australia, there was a 15-meter long python, 15 meters, that existed up until the end of the last ice age. Now, Aboriginal people, the scientists who studied this, the Wargle, they found that it belonged to a specific family of pythons that is now extinct. It was a family of pythons that came from the age of the dinosaurs. And unlike normal snakes that can dislocate their jaw to be able to swallow big things, the Wargle could not dislocate its jaw. It was one of the characteristics of this particular snake. But the Aboriginal people said this snake had hair on its head. Now, if you've got a snake with cheveux on its head, with hair on its head, it's beginning to sound a little bit like a dragon. So that was one of the reasons why it was called dragon dreaming. But the other thing too is that everybody has a comfort zone. Basically, if you look at human personality, people are either introvert or they're extrovert. Introverts get their motivation predominantly from inside themselves. Mm-hmm. Extroverts get it from outside, from the environment in which they're in. Now, we all have both. Sometimes we're introverts, sometimes we're extroverts. And it varies. It varies depending upon the weather. It depends upon who you're with. It depends upon the activity you're engaged in. But you have a dominant sense. So there is a comfort zone you have, somewhere between introversion and extroversion. The same thing happens with how do you get information? Do you get your you make your decisions more by thinking about it or by feeling about it? Now you do both, but some people are more thinkers than feelers. Some people are more feelers than thinkers. Now, in terms of your information, do you get your information more through intuition or more through your physical senses? Dreamers get their information more through intuition. Doers get their information more through their physical senses. And then planners work a lot more through foresight. Celebrators work more through hindsight. Planners work a lot through reconsideration. Celebrators work a lot more through reflection. So you can actually map your comfort zone in those directions. You create a comfort zone map. Now, the interesting thing about the comfort zone map is that the edge of your comfort zone is your learning zone. It's where you learn the most, when you get to the edge of your comfort zone. Beyond the edge of your comfort zone is your danger zone. It's where you feel uncomfortable. And what happens is, in projects and life, when you go beyond your comfort zone, what we tend to do is we boomerang. We want to get back in our comfort zone as quickly as possible. But the danger zone is where your dragons live. And when you learn to dance with your dragons, when you learn to dance with your fears, when you get in touch with those, that's where you learn the most and you learn the fastest. So the dragon is what lies outside your comfort zone.
Where the magic happens.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you, John. And another question about the PINAKARI.
PINAKARI, yes. It's an Aboriginal word.
And what is this, and what is the sense of using the PINAKARI?
What happens is we spend most of our time not listening to what is being said, but listening to the little voice in our head. And I know what the little voice tends to say. The little voice will tend to say, yes, he's right. Or it'll say, no, he's wrong. Or the little voice might be saying, what little voice in the head is he talking about? I don't have a little voice in the head. That's the little voice that's talking. And it's a voice that makes judgments. It's a voice that actually builds the ego. Now, what Aboriginal people say is that we need to have a tool that can silence the little voice in the head so we can be fully present. So we can be fully present without evaluation or without judgment. And PINAKARI is one process that helps you be fully present. It comes from an Aboriginal language from the Great Sandy Desert in Western Australia. The people who live there are called the Mardu Mandjilajara. Mandjilajara is their language. Mardu is what the people call themselves. And the interesting thing about Aboriginal languages is that in English, we recognize the difference, as you do in French, between P and B. But in Aboriginal languages, they have a sound that is exactly halfway between the two. Now, what that means, it means Europeans who hear Aboriginal people speaking, some Europeans think they say a P, and some Europeans think they say a B. So it makes writing Aboriginal words really difficult. And so although PINAKARI is written PINAKARI, and we say PINAKARI, but if you can imagine saying a sound that is exactly halfway between a P and a B, PINAKARI. Yeah. That's the actual word. And what it means, it literally means ears up It's what a kangaroo does when it pays attention to you. A kangaroo, when it sees a human, will focus on the human. It won't listen to a little voice in its head. It'll give you complete attention. And so PINAKARI is a process of paying complete attention to what's going on, not listening to the little voice in the head, silencing that little voice in the head. But it's difficult to do, because what tends to happen is you might be able to silence the little voice in the head for 10, 20 minutes perhaps. But after 20 minutes in our culture, the little voice will start talking again. And so we need to have a way of repeatedly coming back and silencing the little voice in the head so we can be fully present to what's going on about us.
It's like a way to be really present, open, and to deal with the little ego, with the judgments.
Just set the ego aside.
Yeah.
Aboriginal people say that when you're fully capable of practicing PINAKARI, you can literally hear the song of the earth.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you, John. Another kind of questions. Is there any link between the dragon dreaming with the three pillar and the permaculture with the three pillar that it looks quite the same?
They are similar, except they're also a little bit different.
Yeah.
Land care, people care, and earth fair share, which are the three pillars of permaculture. One of the things that happened when dragon dreaming first came to Europe in 2008, the first workshop in dragon dreaming was a workshop that I ran at the invitation of Joanna Macy. Joanna, the creator of the work that we connect, and she said, John, I'd like you to run a 2-hour presentation for everyone here about dragon dreaming. And so I did a 2-hour presentation, and I was invited by the German Permaculture Academy to do a dragon dreaming workshop for the Permaculture Academy. And then Beat Roli, who is a permaculturalist who lives in Lucerne in Switzerland, he invited me to come and run a series of dragon dreaming workshops for permaculturists in Switzerland. So there has been a strong overlap between dragon dreaming and permaculture. They both come from Australia. They both come from crazy Australians who invent these sorts of things, and they both have a focus upon sustainability and about regeneration. So in that sense, there is a similarity, but it's incidental. It's not a deliberate thing at all. Partly because they're both very largely inspired from Aboriginal culture. And so that Aboriginal culture, the care of the earth is very much a part of Aboriginal culture that has inspired both movements.
For us, it looks like some kind of systemic thinking to pay attention to the details on the person and the system of the person and the whole system.
Yeah, there's some very good references that have inspired that systemic view of dragon dreaming. In addition to the work of Joanna Macy, Joanna Macy's books, which I strongly would recommend you people get hold of. Her first book was called Despair and Personal Power in the Nuclear Age. Her second book was her PhD thesis called Dharma and Development, looking at the connection between socially engaged Buddhism and social change. A third book is World as Lover, World as Self, which is very interesting because it links personal growth to community building to service to the earth. A fourth book, which is possibly her most famous one, is Coming Back to Life, towards the work that reconnects. Before she wrote Coming Back to Life, a book she wrote was called Thinking Like a Mountain, Towards a Council of All Beings. And Dragon Dreaming drew a lot from Thinking Like a Mountain. In fact, it's the text for a workshop that we ran for 20 years, doing 2 workshops of Thinking Like a Council of All Beings every year for 20 years. And a lot of projects came out of that. Joanna's biography is called Widening Circles. And her latest book is called Active Hope, Staying Sane in a World That's Going Mad. So that's a very useful one too. In terms of living systems theory, the references there is a book by Gregory Bateson called Steps Towards an Ecology of the Mind. And Fritjof Capra has written one called A Living System. So they are good references for the background, the theoretical and philosophical background of Dragon Dreaming.
Thank you for all these references. You speak about Gregory Bateson. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a des liens entre le Dragon Dreaming et les approches de PNL, entre autres les niveaux logiques, avec des niveaux qui sont en bas, qui sont plutôt l'environnement, au-dessus plutôt les comportements, au-dessus c'est plutôt les croyances, tout en haut les valeurs, et quelque part on peut retrouver ça dans certains des cadrans avec le rêve, se connecter aux valeurs, les stratégies.
Bien sûr. In Dragon Dreaming, one of the philosophical bases of Dragon Dreaming, which is the difference between the thinking and the theory and the practice, which has similarities to NLP. The thinking and practice dimension was inspired very much by the work of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire talked about the fact that we need to integrate the thinking with the practice in what he calls the praxis. Thinking without practice is irrelevant, but practice without thinking is blind. Practice without theory is blind. Theory without practice is irrelevant. So we need to integrate both. And that gave that vertical dimension in Dragon Dreaming. The horizontal dimension between the individual and the environment comes from the studies that I did more than 40 years ago now in non-formal education. I wrote a PhD thesis on the relationship between community education and community development in the southern highlands of Papua New Guinea. And that's where the first model of Dragon Dreaming was presented. There's only ever been one person who's completely read my thesis in the last 40 years. Only one, and that's Lysandra.
And how big it is?
583 pages.
So much.
Okay, super.
Can we find it somewhere?
Come to the library here.
Yes.
Liz has got one copy in Brazil.
So we are in book references and we are waiting for yours.
Yes, mine has been coming for a long time. Well, there are the fact sheets.
Okay.
The fact sheets. And there's also the ebook that's online. but there's a French version, traduction française, of the Dragon Dreaming. But it was Joanna Macy who in 2001 suggested that I write a book on dragon dreaming. Now, it's 21 years ago now. It's about time it happened.
Okay, but it's a project you are working on this?
Project I've been working on for a long time. And there is, in fact, 280 PowerPoints that I've got a document with 280 different PowerPoints that are animated, which are the basis for the book. But it's got to be, PowerPoints is not a book.
No.
But yeah, it could be copied. The PowerPoints could be sent to you if you're interested.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
With pleasure. Okay. Thank you. We've got also some questions about your vision of the world, of today's world, and yeah, big question, big question. What do you think the world needs, and what are the main the levels of change?
Well, I think that COVID has been trying to teach us some lessons. The first lesson, COVID-19, the pandemic, has been teaching us is we thought the world would not change very fast. Hello? It's changed very fast. And I think that the next 10 years, that change is going to accelerate. It's changing faster and faster. With climate change, with biodiversity loss, with the gaps between rich and poor, with the war in Ukraine. These are all things that show us that the world is changing very fast. The second lesson COVID is teaching us is that people keep saying they want to go back to normal. Hello? Normal doesn't exist. Going back to normal, we were losing 15 species an hour. 360 species a day were becoming extinct. 99% of those are bacteria, but we have no understanding. They're not even studied by science. Most of them were bacteria that lived in the soil. Now farming practices and the clearing of forests and everything else were forcing these species into extinction. So that's the second lesson. Normal doesn't exist. We don't need normal. We need to be abnormal, extraordinarily different. That's the second problem. The third problem is all of those things that we've swept under the carpet. The gaps between rich and poor, the growing homelessness. You've just had an election in France. If you look at what has been happening in that election, those gaps, those things that are happening, they cannot be concealed anymore. We can't pretend they're not happening. And the fourth lesson is there is only one thing that is powerful enough, only one thing that's powerful enough to overcome the problems that we are facing. And that is that we need to liberate human creativity on a scale that has never before been tried. It's the liberation of the human spirit that is necessary. Now, what I often say is that we are not human beings. We are not human beings. We are human becomings. we have not yet achieved our full humanity. And so that is what we need to do. Now, if we look at history, we look at cultures, psychopaths are less than 3% of the population. When you look at heads of major corporations or look at politicians, up to 30% of them are psychopaths. Why do we do this? Now, when you look at history, there was something that happened nearly 5,000 years ago. 5,000 years ago, in the first walled city in the world, it was a city called Uruk. And Uruk was a city in southern Iraq that had a population of 50,000 people. It was the first big city in the history of the world. And what happened to keep that population of 50,000 people together? They created a polarization between us and them. And we have been living out of that polarization between us and them ever since. And it's violent. You can see what's happening in Iraq, in Ukraine at the moment, between us and them. Now, the city of Uruk is actually found in the Bible. It was called Erech by the Jews. They copied the name from the Persians. So Erech in Arabic is Iraq. So Iraq comes from the name of the oldest city in the world. Now, one of the things about civilization, where psychopaths come to the top, is that they are built like pyramids. You have a small elite at the top, then you have the middle class, and then you have the people at the bottom. And those sorts of cultures are only sustainable if they can expand. Because only if they expand can the middle class hope to become elite, and the poor people hope to become middle class. Only if the system is expanding. So civilization has expanded from southern Iraq to Egypt, to India, to China, then to the great empires of the world, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Roman Empire, the Chinese Empire. And now it's expanded to cover the whole world. But it can expand no more. It's now reached its maximum size. Now, what happens when civilizations stop expanding? They collapse. We've had 31 civilizations on this planet. There's one left, and that's ours. The scientific and technological civilization that we live in today. And it cannot expand anymore. So what we need to do, we need to build a post-civilized culture that is as different from conventional us and them civilizations as the us and them civilizations were different from the cultures that went before. So we are building a post-civilized world. And dragon dreaming is one tool of that liberates human creativity on a scale that's never before been tried. That's why it's so important.
Thank you, John. When I hear you speaking of that, it remembers me Rob Hopkins.
Rob Hopkins is very clever. One of the things he does, he lives in Totnes in Devon. And Totnes in Devon is very close to Dartington, which is where the Schumacher Centre is located. And I met Rob in 2006 at Schumacher Centre, and he invited me to come to Totnes and run a dragon dreaming workshop with him. And it was there that by doing dragon dreaming that Rob learned the importance of celebration. So that's where Rob learned about celebration, was from dragon dreaming. And the other thing too, when they set up the Totnes pound, you might remember the currency, the community currency he set up, Totnes pound. That was based on a talk that I gave to Rob. But Rob was even cleverer. He set up the Totnes pound as a research project that would last for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, he shut the pound system down and they researched how it could be improved. And then they started it again with all the improvements, which was much better than what we did with our local currencies here in Western Australia. We set up 43 local currencies at one stage, and most of them have collapsed.
One last question. This year, it's comment on dit, 10e anniversaire du réseau Dragon Dreaming.
It's the 10th anniversary of Dragon Dreaming France.
In France. And what would you like to say to the French community?
What the French committee needs to do: support each other.
Yes.
That's the secret, is how well do you support each other in the activities and the dreams and the plans and the doing that the different people are doing. The more you can build that support, that's the celebration. And 25% of everything you do needs to be celebration. If you are not celebrating 25% of the time, you'll get burnout. And then for your own sanity, you'll have to pull out of the thing, because burnout is a horrible place to be in. So you need to support each other through celebration, celebrating each other and celebrating each other for the work that you're doing.
Thank you a lot, John. It was a big pleasure to have you for this interview. Have a nice time in Australia.
Thank you. Thank you. And all the best.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.